Oh, thank you. I was just about to say that. Thanks very much, Leo. Just to say that sometimes people aren't able to make these things, but we do know that it is watched by quite a few people, and it is really important for us to have this as a way to think together. So beginning with Rebecca on Ohene-Asah, who is one of the leaders of the Heritage of Osofo, the Dadzie television drama project. And Rebecca herself is a researcher with interests in cinema, history, and heritage, documentary film studies, and archival practices, including film museology, which is a really interesting kind of framing. And she teaches various film courses at the National Film and Television Institute, NAFTI, in Accra, Ghana, and her research focuses on identifying and highlighting relationships between contemporary Western African cinema and its diverse histories. And leading also this project with her is George Bosompim, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, and producer, and currently also lecturing at the National Film and Television Institute in Ghana. Previously, he worked with the Ghana Film Company. He has a vast portfolio of work for which he received the Ghana Film Awards in 2002 as the Best Documentary Director. His productions include, among other shows, the 3D drama series Cape Coast Motel, District Colonial Court, Barber and Shoeshine Boy, and All That Glitters. And it could be a much longer list, but I will just put it to those. And responding to them is another award-winning documentary filmmaker based in South Africa, who's Mark Kaplan. His films have focused on social and political issues, human rights, and historical memory. And for his work, he has won awards, including the Emmy for The Lion's Trail, Best International Documentary at One World for Where the Truth Lies. And the power in his work in part stems from his time in exile from apartheid South Africa. And he joined Imagining Futures even before the project officially began to already explore ways of documenting stories from people and from their landscapes. And without further ado, I give it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think I'll just begin by trying to share my screen. Okay. I'm not sure why. Okay. All right, I got it.
Great.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you for having us. I'm just going to go straight into the objectives of our project. Now, when we first began this project, we had three main objectives. The first was to search, collect, and digitize remnants of Osofo Dadzie drama, TV drama. The second was to engage in an audiovisual documentation, which involved to produce a documentary video and exhibit this video for the purposes of advocacy and education. The third was to undertake some kind of a content analysis of what we are able to restore in order to understand what Osofo Dadzie actually encompassed. Now, to be able to even go on to what we did, I'd like to just talk briefly about what Osofo Dadzie is. This drama aired on primetime TV from 1972 to the early 1990s. It was actually born out of, in the early 1960s up to the 1980s, there was a proliferation of traveling groups, drama groups, theater groups, which were traveling throughout the country, you know, utilizing music, dance, and then other forms of mainly folktale, where they will perform at different places. Now, in the 1970s, GBC, which aired this program, wanted to bring some of these onto national television. So they began to invite some of these groups. And one of the groups was SK Opon's group, musical group. Now, SK Opon's group metamorphosed into Osofo Dadzie drama. And the drama was really, it was kind of, a counter alternative to what had existed, because before Osofo Dadzie, the dramas that we found on television were mostly in English language. So you could say that Osofo Dadzie was a major, turning point where indigenous languages began to feature very actively on television. Now, mind you, GBC at that time was the only national television, was the only national TV, was the only TV station. And so this was what everybody watched it, almost everybody watched it. And in our interviews and interactions, we're finding out that the show, the TV program was, it was a morally educated one, and people believed that it mirrored the consciousness of the nation, basically. Now, most of the things that people said points to the fact that people found a lot of value in what Osofo Dadzie, stood for. And today, people look at it as it is reflected in the memories of the artists and in the memories of the people who worked on it as crew members. And I'll just play this short video of an actress for us to understand.
Who were not born, and those who don't know, and even those who were kids at that time, they will come to realize, to know. Sometimes what's it, No, there was once a group view called Osofo Dadzie, but then if they get to see it, we are here, we watch these Bold and Beautiful, bare 20-something years, and all these drama, lots of them, 30 years, yes, we watch them. And if they also get to watch their own, at the time, the group was existing, but then they've come to watch it now. I think it's a huge thing. It's a big thing, it's a big deal. It's just like history. We still have to go back for our history. I think it's going to be huge.
So basically, she's talking about the fact that, just like how some audiovisual materials are cherished in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, it is important that Osofo Dadzie is also viewed in the same way. She decries the fact that we don't get to see it anymore, because she uses English and then Tree. In the documentary, we'll get to have subtitles, so everybody will get to understand everything everybody says. But yes, the value of this show is reflected in the memories of those who worked on it and those who played in it. The value of Osofo Dadzie is also, the heritage is also represented in the built heritage, where the head of state at the time that Osofo Dadzie show was at its height, this was a champon in the 1970s. A champon had, because of how Osofo Dadzie had helped in national development issues and all that, had actually donated homes to the players of this show, the players and also the crew members. And so in Ghana today, we have a neighborhood in Accra called Dansuma, where they call, there's a small portion where they call Osofo Dadzie area. So if you go there today and you are looking for Osofo Dadzie area, they will show you a whole neighborhood that was named after this show. The heritage of Osofo Dadzie is also present in the theme music, which was developed by a group known as Osibisa. Osibisa sang this song, which I'll play for you, in 1971. And in 1971, it actually was on top of the charts in the UK. And so it coincided with Osofo Dadzie, when it was launched in 1972, they decided to use this music as the theme music. And today, when people hear this song, the first thing that comes to mind is Osofo Dadzie. So I'll just play a little bit of that for you to appreciate. So it's a little longer, but we don't have time. We can't play everything. But yeah, so this music, anybody who hears it today, most people don't even think about Osibisa, the group. They think about Osofo Dadzie, the drama, and the impact that it had on the Ghanaian society from the 1970s up to the early 1990s. Now, our search, when we were searching for remnants of Osofo Dadzie, it first took us to the archives of GBC. Now, at GBC, we were confronted, they have a very nice library, everything is in there, nicely kept. But when you go into the archive, it's a different story. The archive was quite in a deplorable state. Substandard, storage conditions, bad labeling. You couldn't tell one thing from the other, and the ventilation was, mostly very poor for these materials. And we found very few Osofo Dadzie materials in there because in the 1980s, the whole library was burnt, and the few that were recovered, we found just about 7 Umatic tapes and then a few Betacam and then some 1/4 inch. Now, what caught our attention the most was the storage condition of the other materials that may not have even gotten burnt, but that we saw there. And when we had our interviews with most of the stakeholders, these were things that featured very strongly, where most of our stakeholders, decried the poor maintenance culture of our audiovisual materials. Generally, it's not just GBC, because our search also took us to the audiovisual library. This is the National Audiovisual Library, which is run by the Information Services Department of the Information Ministry in Ghana. And this is what we met. Most of the materials were completely destroyed. Like if you can see even some, DV tapes, which are quite recent, but all these materials are jumbled, just put together with all dirty and moldy. And in fact, about a week after we left these materials, a disposal company was asked to clear up the space so that they could use it, and everything is basically burnt. So these were some of the things that some members of our society, were stakeholders, commented, and this was part of the material that we shared. And maybe, I'm not sure if Mark was able to see, but part of what I'm sure Elena, you saw. So at this point, I will hand over to George, who will talk about some of our findings and some of our preliminary conclusions or analysis. George.
Our preliminary findings, we'll look at a theme of the contents of what they were doing, and so we realized that they're looking at trending issues, like topical social issues that they use for their drama, and then things that were of national interest, so education, political things, that mattered to the Ghanaian public at the time, the 1970s, were used in some of their plays. And when you talk about education bit, even when Ghana was changing from, was it left to right?
Left to right, right to left.
Right to left, of the road. When we're changing, we used to use the British system, and then we changed. And so now we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and that bit was also part of the thing that they put out there in their drama. And then we also look at the form and style that they were using. It's more of concert party, which is already talked about, the structure, and then incorporate music and dance in there. Then they were recording live too as well. It was live television recording, so everything that they did was live. It wasn't pre-recorded, which was brilliant at the time, because it means that the performers were so good that everything that they did was live. And then the set, we look at the set construction, which is purely wood that they use in constructing the stage or the set for them to record. And interestingly, if you look at the montage of even the one that she was playing immediately, if you had the video, that would have been fine. But you look at it and you realize we're using cards. That's also was talking about technology at the time, television technology at that time, because we're using cards for montage, the graphics. These days and age, we use the digital graphics, but they didn't have that kind of thing at the time. But you could see the transition from that stage, from the 70s when they used the card up to this day, when in the 90s when digital stuff started and they were using the digital stuff. So they had gone through that basically 2.5 decades of technology, which was also interesting, something that was interesting. Then the theme and script development was pretty interesting when we interviewed the first writer who actually developed the concept, and he was telling us that they just pick the themes and then they go for a meeting with all the crew and the players, and they discuss it. While discussing, then they'll do ad-libbing. They let the actors do the ad-libbing. After that, then he goes home, think about it and write it. And interestingly, this writer at the age of 21 became the advisor to the head of state of Ghana at the time, through Osofo Dadzie. And we thought it was very interesting looking at that. Then the other thing that came up was getting access, because most officials at GBC, although they understood what we were doing, were giving us problems because they didn't want us to have access to it. Why? Because they were a bit skeptical, because somebody had come earlier on to do the same thing with their radio, the audio tapes that they had at the time. And that person had given them problems because of copyright. He had also assumed ownership of what he had done. And so if somebody needed that material, they had to go and see him, which they didn't, and it wasn't part of the terms that they came to. And it was a problem for them. So at a point in time, we had to wait for 3 months, halt the whole of the project and wait for 3 months for them to come back to us, so we could explain to them and get them to understand that this is for them, it's not for us. And it's for academic work that we're doing, and it's a heritage thing that we need to deal with. And the other thing that we also came to understand is that there were a lot of private collectors who got this thing, recorded at that time, I think on VHS, and transferred that on CDs and the rest. And so those collectors also put them on YouTube. So you can see bits and pieces on YouTube as well. So basically this was our finding. Thank you.
Oh, is that the...
Well, I think we'll talk a little bit more about our preliminary analysis. So, with George, you want to talk?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So with our analysis, we are thinking that we take heritage as something that is constructed in the present, and we should have some recourse to the past, as Christian Blas Gimblatt, states here. Now, so because of this, we think that the restored copies could be used as references from the past that could influence the development of new drama that will take into consideration what is happening today. Because we realize that we might not be able to completely bring Osofo Dadzie, the historical Osofo Dadzie, back, but what we have found, once we go through sensitization workshops and education, there is the possibility that these materials can influence what is going to be produced from henceforth. The styles, the strategies, and how the shows were created, we think are things that can carry forward into our imagined futures. And so what we're saying is that the restored copies and also the documentary films could be used, in such education. And even for us as NAFTI, because we are a training institute, we have a television unit here. The documentary and also the copies that have been restored could form a very important aspect of our curriculum. And so this is where we are looking at things. We are still trying to conclude the digitization. And once that is done, I am sure that we will be able to come to a more firm, conclusion of what the heritage of Osofo Dadzie really encompasses. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That sounds like a lot of work. Could you just, yeah, wonderful. So if I just ask Mark to be the first respondent of that, I have a whole series of my own questions. I'm sure others do as well. Mark, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I'm truly kind of inspired. I had no idea really what Osofo Dadzie, had its place in Ghanaian kind of cultural history. And so I put together some kind of questions and observations. And having listened now to the presentation, I can truly say that some of those questions that I had have been at least partially answered, because I did wonder about how the power of television, which is a good thing and a bad thing, how was it utilized in this particular instance? I'm thinking about, how we tell stories and how the use of television is sometimes obscured and actually buried indigenous ways of telling stories and cultural practices. My wife, Gabriela, grew up in Athens, and her father was a civil engineer, and as a young girl, she was taken into very remote areas where her father was building roads. And she says she has a memory of an old man who was very downtrodden and sad because he had been the village entertainer. And he had lost all purpose because people instead were kind of glued to the television, the one and only television set in the village. And, it was absolute rubbish that was being played. And so I did wonder, kind of when I was presented with this project, there clearly was a mix here of heritage and indigenous kind of forms of storytelling, of incorporating music and dance, which suggested, kind of that there was something else at play here. So I'm very encouraged, and I don't think I've ever come across a project like this. I mean, it's very rare to kind of find, a drama series that actually kind of is built on, something that's already in society, that is already, captivating kind of a national audience. I'm also struck by the fact that, what's left are these burnt kind of fragments. And, recently at the University of Cape Town, we had a huge fire. And, we lost much of our own kind of materials. I was lucky. I was one of the few who only lost about half of his materials because I was working on the other half, the most important halves. So it kind of, for me, it also, raised the kind of issue of, what are these fragments? What do you do with them? I mean, what is the conversation that you use when you carry, when you kind of restore those fragments into some kind of conversation? What is that conversation? What are the key questions that need to be asked? And it's a question about the past and how the past connects to the present. And, there's that wonderful phrase where, the past is never past and it's always in the present. So for me, with this project, you know, I'm asking myself, what are those conversations that connect the unfinished business of the past with the ongoing unfinished business of today? And so in the drama series, I'm wondering about identity, about cultural heritage, about the power relations built into those drama series. It's interesting to hear that much of it was ad-libbed. But I'm wondering about the agency given to women, for example, in the way that women, the roles that women played, the power relations between men and women, and what that said to that kind of conversation that was ongoing in Ghanaian society. I was also wondering about the mix of the Western influence versus indigenous. You know, again, referring back to South Africa, the power of television was such that the apartheid regime delayed the introduction of television because they were scared of it. They couldn't control it. So, you know, it was something that kind of where there was an inherent kind of power, but consequent to this, I think for the most part, it's a power that has not educated us anywhere in the world. It's been television has been abused, I think, and I think it's been an instrument that has sold us kind of, you know, kind of influences and driven kind of a taste for materialism, a kind of a, you know, a fetishization of you know, things that we can't have. You know, things that are kind of, you know, sort of from another place, from kind of America, from Hollywood, kind of, you know, these are kind of inherently kind of threatening, you know, kind of formats into, you know. So I was kind of thinking, well, to what extent was this drama based around education? To what extent was it entertainment? To what extent does it kind of gloss over the cracks of you know, that are inherent in any society? To what extent was it actually peace building? So because the claims that this project is making about kind of, you know, mirroring a national consciousness, I was kind of wondering, well, that's a huge claim. And, you know, I mean, and what is that national consciousness? And it's a mix, is it not, of colonial European and indigenous. So I'm expecting that in some sense, there's a kind of a mix built into the drama series and an inherent tension in that drama series around that mix. And so then kind of, you know, the conversation, the kind of key questions that arise from that is, you know, to what extent was the series influenced by imported forms? It seems like in many ways, from what we're hearing, it wasn't. And it was built on, you know, kind of what was already in society and already treasured in society. And I'm really, really interested in that. To what extent was, you know, Ghana at the time, you know, modernizing and accepting a Western viewpoint, and therefore seeing this drama series as something that's helped in that process. I'm wondering to what extent the storylines of those drama series built on the major events of the day. And I was also wondering about censorship, because normally, you know, kind of, you know, popular television like this is subject to gatekeepers. And, you know, there's censorship. So I was wondering to what extent kind of that played a role in the shaping of the stories. But I'm also hearing, you know, conversely, that much of the stories, at least in the beginning, were ad-libbed, and there was a looseness and a freedom of expression, and it must have been a huge amount of fun. And I just think it's wonderful that this project is now an opportunity to resuscitate kind of what sounds to me to be kind of quite magical, quite unique, where we don't see kind of the characters who are driving the story becoming ventriloquists. In other words, becoming the the carriers of some outside influence, you know, kind of from Hollywood or somewhere else, where, you know, kind of, you know, we encourage that that's the way development lies. That's the way that's a superior culture. So I think I want to leave it there, but you know, but I'm really, really super excited to know more.
Thanks very much, Mark. Rebecca and George, did you want to come back to some of those points? And then we can also open up to other questions. If people have questions, just either raise hand in whatever way you want or put something in the chat.
Okay, I'll talk through the period in which this film, this television series started and what the trajectory of our political system at the time, you know, because then if you look at the 1960s, when we just got out of colonial rule, and GBC had just come into being in the 1960s, around 1965. And that period when we had the first ever coup done in Ghana. So it's a military coup that took over, and then GBC was still, you know, strong in at that moment, that they brought all these things up. It's interesting because by 1972, we had just entered into a democratic dispensation. That was our second time trying democracy. And these Osofo Dadzie could go to the point of talking about the political situation at the time, you know, and figure out even what should happen in future. If you look at the kind of stories that were churning out at the time. The same thing happened within the 1980s, you know, from the 1972 thing, we then went back into the coup era of 1979. And then the next thing was 1981. And all these moments were turned out somehow into drama, you know, and the issues that came with it were treated in this drama. Up to the 1990s again, when we go back into the democratic era. So it's interesting if you really look at the kind of stories that they turn out, which is sad that we lost them. We lost most of it in 1988 because they spoke about issues that concern us politically, economically, socially, and were very, very educative as well. And so they're actually contributing to national development in a way, you know, which is very interesting when we look at the time that they were on the screen for this almost 3 decades, you know, as we tie it into our national discourse and our political history. So that's my first comment. I think Rebecca will also come in.
You spoke about agency, and I think I found that to be very thought-provoking because SK Opon's group was a male group, you know, it was a male musical group. And then they decided it's metamorphosed into Osofo Dadzie. There were women in there, but mostly the stories, the protagonists were mostly the men. Now, an interesting thing that we're noticing is that in the documentary film that we are producing, the women are probably now having their agency because most of the people that we are getting to interview, most of the surviving cast are actually women. They're women. Most of the male, you know, protagonists have all passed, you know, and so if the women did not get their chance that time, because they were mostly supporting, now they get to relive and retell this story. They are the people now telling us what was happening at that time, you know, and I find that very, very interesting that it's some kind of a delayed agency, you could call it, you know. So yeah, that I thought that was very profound, you know, when you asked about whether women had agency in there. And maybe this is a way of getting a chance to also give a version of the narrative that has always been known. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that very much. Kozo, I saw you put on your camera earlier. I don't know if that's because you were hoping to ask a question. Did you want to go ahead now? Are you okay?
I wanted you to know I was still around. Okay, that's why I showed you. Yeah, but if given the opportunity, I should say a follow-up to what George and Rebecca have just said. It's the drama on TV at the time was a metamorphosis of what we used to call the concert party situation. And with bands going around the villages, performing at the same time, acting, okay? So drama in the villages at the local level, and many of them would comment on social situations. So it was like social commentary, which also incorporated aspects of politics, economics, and so on. Now, because they were on the road most of the time, women were limited. So it wasn't like deliberately leaving the women out. It was when they came onto TV, which was stationary, they were focused in the city, that they started bringing in women. And also it's a reflection of what happened to our society from especially the colonial time, when women were separated from the men, even in the school system, okay? In church, women would sit to the right or to the front and the men at the back. In the school system, girls' dormitory, different from boys' dormitory, and women were not supposed to join men in certain endeavors. It's like, and when I teach, I say, the women have even internalized that and say, in Akan language, they'll say, Semioba, but I'm a lady, so I'm not supposed to do this. Okay, but when Osofo, Dadzie, SK Upon and co started bringing women, the whole society saw that, look, women had power, because some of them, they were not only, we'll say in Ghana, they were funny, but they were very assertive in their presentation of social discourse. And so the surviving ones, like Rebecca said, are beginning to tell their own story. Now, many of them are into film production. Some of them are not only actresses, but they are also producing their own film. So that agency, this is the background to it. And I think that going back to work on the Osofo Dadzie thing, it's good for the nation, because we don't have anything again. Now we have the Malaysian films, Kumkum Baja and so on, and ad-lib with Malaysians performing, and then we are hearing it in Twi. And so one wonders if it's a deliberate thing to kill the local initiative, or what is going on in the name of globalization and commodification of the media space. That's my commentary on this. Thank you.
Cultural imperialism.
Thank you.
A cultural imperialism of a sort.
Yes.
Can I ask? Oh, there's I think there's a. Should I read it out, Nancy, or did you want to speak? So there's a big comment in the chat. Nancy, I don't know if you've got enough internet. Yeah, go on, try it.
Please read it for me. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. I can. Okay, so Nancy Rushahora, who some of you will know, is one of the project leads from Tanzania, working especially on the Maji Maji War. She says, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. This project reminds me of a case in Lindi, so this is in South Tanzania, where a poet named Jamaluddin created an archive during colonialism. He was one of the earliest literate Muslims. He was imprisoned for his poems and died in prison. What happened to his archive is what relates to Mark's review. Some of the documents were taken and translated, but the remaining ones were burnt by his family. The means used was different from the traditional forms, ? The content maybe was not originating from the community. He was mainly challenging colonialism and recording events in poems. So I don't know if you wanted to come back on that, Rebecca and George. It's also in the chat.
Yes, I guess, we're still looking into the content. As Prof. Davos said, the content really, when we spoke about mirroring the, national consciousness, it is because, socioculturally, economically, and everything, these people, if the shows were mostly educational, but they could be satires where they were making like strong comments on things that were happening in the society. One of the things that in our interviews we picked up from the first writer was that there were some of the shows that they did in order to, tell government that we are not happy with a certain tax that you're trying to bring, for instance, So they will stage a play in which will play on TV, and then it's supposed to send some kind of a signal to government. And to the extent that governments of the day were listening, they were watching, they were paying attention to what they did, for us, it makes this show a very, important one that needs to be highlighted,
Thanks, Rebecca. Baraka, did you want to ask a question? I saw you put on your camera for a minute.
No, I don't have a question. I was just following up. I was just needing to nod in my head, say that, okay, I get it.
Thanks very much. I have a question actually, which kind of links some of also what Koto and Mark were saying. What I was really interested, again, the ad-libbing. I mean, it's interesting how the ad-libbing is not just methodology. That's presumably something you can really think about in terms of method when you teach film. And I can see that as an educational thing. But also in terms of where does it overlap with performance on stage? And I guess, Kocho, you started, I think I saw yours as a bit of a response to that. So it's overlapping with lots of other kind of performance traditions. And I don't know, Rebecca and George, did you want to say a little bit more about that? Or was theater more like what Kocho described? Or was there other forms of theater that this was linking into?
Obviously, obviously there were other forms of theater at the time, because if you listen to what Rebecca said, there were English drama that was been, that had been on television for a period of time, and they thought that this could counter that, because this is more indigenous. So that's there, which is pure English drama that would, like kind of Shakespearean and, that kind of thing. Shakespearean drama that was being shown. But with this one, because of the indigenous bit of it and the fact that they had used language Twi, which was the main language that we're using, around the whole of the country and gone, like what Kojo mentioned, gone around the whole of the country, performed, it was easier for them to come on television and do this because, in terms of even ad-libbing, they were just picking the themes and building stories around it. These were people who had already gone around on stage and done this severally around the country. So it was easy for them to pick any theme and ad-lib, but from what Joris said, Joris Wattenberg, who was the first writer, he said he would just give them the theme and give them simple scenarios and they will ad-lib. When they had finished, he realized that they put in more than he has even thought of. And so he'd go home and do his first draft of the script and come back to them. So it was scripted, yes, but it started with ad-lib so that he would also pick something from them because he knew they were very experienced actors and players at the time. Besides that, he was just a young man who was in the first or second year. I think he was in second year university at the time when he was writing for Osofo Dadzie. So he was also learning from them. So it was a learning process for him as well. Whilst they churn out all these drama, he was learning at the same time, putting out education as well.
So I just want to add something about this ad-libbing. In fact, even today, in terms of the video productions that are being churned out in Ghana today, this style of ad-libbing is still present in the sense that in most of the AHRC videos that are produced on our screens, some of the videos, most of the videos that you would see, most of them may not come with a script. What happens is that the director will sit with the players, describe scenarios and give it to them so that they can provide, a dialogue that will fit that scenario. And for me, it sounds like, giving some of the ownership to the players, because the narrative is not only coming from whoever has the hegemony, whoever has, you know, the task of producing or the task of being the director or whatever, but it was some kind of a shared, you know, ownership, some kind of a shared ownership where the players came in with their own experiences and their own ideas about how this show should play out. And for me, that is how I see this ad lib, you know, transcending the Osofo Dadzie period into what we see today on our screens. It is something that is happening today.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, I must say I have a whole lot of other questions, but we've pretty much run out of time. Just some of the questions that I was going to ask you, but maybe we can continue thinking about this, is very much the historical one. So the importance of this show about, I think, and this is what you and Mark were talking about early on, and what Kodjo also brought in and Nancy noted, it's about how does this show kind of soft power about thinking through these ideas together. So, and also, you know, what isn't it maybe. I was interested about the gatekeepers. We didn't really touch on that, but I'd love to hear also more about that and how the ad-libbing and the fact that, George, what you were saying, that it's filmed live, you know, how does it get beyond that? And what kind of gatekeeping do we have now? And I think anybody who's been watching the news going on at the moment about gatekeeping, how people try to circumvent that kind of gatekeeping in the crisis situation. You mentioned that this show kept going when there were coups and things. I mean, I would love to know really more about that and how that will play out in your documentary. And as I say, these are conversations to continue, but also I think historically, also methodologically, how the ad-libbing kind of moves between the styles that you get in documentary filmmaking as well, and how it's very much part of that versus what is scripted and not scripted. So there's so much there that it's wonderful that you're saving this, and I'm hoping that you're also interviewing people who watched this show maybe when they were kids and young people. And fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, can we just thank Rebecca and George very much for this really inspiring presentation. And now move on to Swedi, if you're ready. We'll connect you all again, and I hope you will continue this conversation. Thank you very much, Mark, for that provocational and wonderful response.
Hello.
Swedi, great, we can hear you. So did you want to share the screen?
Okay.
And I will, while you do that, I will do some introductions. So next, I have the pleasure of introducing Swedi Mkuta, who I will be talking about survival and legacy of transgenerational memories of colonialism, oral tradition as archive in Tanzania. So this is very much about saving another kind of archive, which links very well with what Rebecca and George just talked about. And Swedi is a scholar based at the University of Dar es Salaam, working on history, archaeology, Kiswahili, and geography. And he also has expertise in digital humanities, and in particular, video, photo, and audio recording and editing systems. And on top of that, in a much more material world, he moves between the material and the non-material. Swedi has specialized in geographical information systems, GIS, for those of us who do archaeology, and mapping in archaeology work, which was particularly used for research at Mgao, Olduvai Gorge, Kilwa Kisiwani World Heritage Site, and Makuyuni in Tanzania, and apologies for mispronouncing some of that. In addition, he has been a social and cultural affairs leader at Dar es Salaam University of the Archaeology and Heritage Students Association. And responding to Swedi, we have Laura Madukoro, whose research explores the history of migrants, refugees, and humanitarians and state authorities in shaping the possibilities and experience of refuge. She's also the author of Elusive Refuge, Chinese Migrants in the Cold War, 2016 work. And she has also worked critically with governmental archives, especially relating to documenting children asylum seekers and refugees. She's currently Associate Professor of History of Migration, Refugees, and Humanitarianism, Settler Colonialism at Carleton University, Ottawa in Canada. So it's very much with that archival experience and working with children's archives that she connects here. So Swedi, the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me? Okay, my name is Swedi Mkuta, and thank you so much once again, Professor Elena and the All Imagining Futures team for giving us this opportunity to present to the audience what we have done in this exciting project. Dear colleagues, welcome once again to the Imagining Futures Dialogue. Today is 15th of March, and as I told you before, my name is Swedi Mkuta, graduate from University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and I'm looking forward to talking with you today about survival and the legacy of transgenerational memories, of colonialism, the case of oral tradition as an archive in Tanzania. Okay, dear colleagues, let's start here. So,
that worked well.
Dear colleagues, let's start on the background information for this project. This project is a continuation of the previous research conducted in the Mgao village in 2020, where the study was known as Survival and the Legacy of Transgenerational Memories of Colonialism at Mgao village. The 2020 study was aimed at exploring colonial memory among the current young generation at Mgao village in Mtwara, Tanzania, particularly those within a school environment, and their age was about 7 up to 18 years old, to archive their understanding of colonialism, and also which are the methods they used to transmit transgenerational memories of trauma, of slavery, and colonialism, and what will be best approach to preserve the memories of trauma in southern Tanzania. The memories here include those trauma, but excluding tradition and custom, which are fundamental in understanding, remembering, and forgetting traumatic past. So let's proceed here. As I said before, that this project was conducted at Mgao village, and Mgao village is one of the historical sites in Tanzania with various historical evidences investigated by various researchers such as Dr. Nancy Rushohora, who have been conducting various studies on this village, whereby this village probably there was a slave trade in the past taking place. Okay. The presence of ancient building in this village and other historical evidences such as ancient wells, ancient tombs, and colonial plantation has sparked various debates among Mgao villagers and various researchers who were fascinated by the history of Mgao village. Dear colleagues, Mgao is a Swahili verb, which means to distribute something. And the distribution meant there is a distribution of slave to different parts of the world. So let's proceed because of time. Okay. Dear colleague, the following are the objectives of the 2020 research. The first one was to identify types of memories preferred by young generation of Mgao village. The second one was to identify kinds of examples that are used in schools and or home and their connection to Mgao's history. And the last one was to annotate the mechanism used for archiving transgenerational memories locally. Okay. So as I told you before, this study was conducted at Mgao village in Mgao Primary School and Kisiwa Secondary School. Focus group discussions and interviews were research methodology. I would like to show this. In the picture, I am with a student from Mgao Primary School and doing a focus group discussion. And on the other hand, I'm also doing an interview at Kisiwa Secondary School. Dear colleagues, I would like to show some videos. Oh. I think there are the challenges here. Okay, let me proceed.
Did you want to put a link in the chat? If it's linked to a website, I can try to do it from here. Or is it something different?
Okay. So the following the findings of the 2020 research. The research found that most of the respondents have little understanding of the history of Mgao village. And the second one, some of the respondents argue that they understand Mgao's history, but in short. And the third one is the study found that most of the respondents stated that are not taught the history of Mgao village at school. And finally, this study found that Mgao elders are too busy with other activities that lack time to tell the tales of their forefathers to the young generation. For instance, they engage in fishing over
Swedi? Yeah, it stopped sharing. Did you want me to share my screen and you tell me when to move forward? Would that be easier?
Yes.
Okay, let me just get the PowerPoint up. And we can start from where you left off. Sorry.
There is a network problem here.
Yep. Okay, so you just, oops. If you just tell me, hold on a sec, where did we end up? We ended up here. No. Are you finished with this slide?
Yes.
Did you go on to the next one or this one?
Yes. Okay. So as I said, Mgao elders are too busy with other activities that lack time to tell the tales of the forefathers to the young generation. For instance, they engage in fishing overnight that is normally used for storytelling. Next slide, please. Okay. So, dear colleagues, a similar research was conducted between 1964 up to 1973 by the University of Dar es Salaam historian students, which intended to document a Maji story. For those who don't know Maji was a resistance against German colonialism in southern Tanzania in 1904 up to 1908. So tape recorders and field notes were used as the research tools, and then these were deposited at University of Dar es Salaam. We have our own section, we call it East Africana, in 1970. Therefore, it's in this collection that the current project was conducted to compare with the data, excuse me, with the data in 2020, and finally to digitize the 19th, to digitize the 1960s up to 1970s analog tapes. So next slide, please, Elena, because of time. Okay, dear colleagues, the following are the research objectives of the current project. The first one, as I said, is to compare the 2020 interviews of Ngao that document the memories of colonialism with those of the 1960s up to 1970s. And the second one is to digitize field notes of the early history students of Tanzania in order to use them in area where this cave oral tradition have disappeared. And the last one was to analyze the recorded way used to transfer memories of colonialism from one generation to another in order to establish the survival mechanism and the legacy. Next slide, please, Elena. Elena?
Yep, it's already on the next one. I don't know if you can
Okay.
see. Yeah, that looks great.
Okay. Okay, so the following are the samples of the audio tape that have been digitized during this current project. As we see, this is one of the tape that contains Ngao's data of 1960s up to 1970s. So, next slide, please, Elena. Elena?
Yep. It's yours.
Okay, okay. So the following, dear colleagues, the following are the keys finding after analysis of these two data. The first one, this project found that there has been a marked broader in elders' knowledge about the history of Ngao village. Example, in site origin, contact, and the impact of the contact. And the second one was more information about the outbreak of the Battle of Swedi Bay. And the third one was the cultural change. Because of influx of culture at the Ngao's village. And the first one was only way used to transfer the memory at Ngao village. First one, through the women's to tell stories. Women are not involved in fishing, but they are collecting mud wells during the daytime, and they have more time with the children than men. And another one, story of origin from Ngao are told at school as a part of pedagogy or friends. So next slide, please, Elena. So during this project, we have succeeded to digitize some of tapes. This project digitized tapes into notes translated from Makonde to Kiswahili and English, and also from Mwela to Kiswahili to English. Probably this was a limitation of this project. Most of the recordings appear in the language other than Kiswahili and English, therefore require translation of vernacular language. As you see, this is an example of documents that have been spoken in Makonde's language, which is vernacular language. So we were needed to change to Kiswahili, and then finally,
Swedi, I don't know if we've lost you there for a little bit. Swedi, if you can hear me, did you want to sign out and sign back in? That might help. So maybe we just continue with the other slide and then Swedi comes back. So I'm just going to keep this up for all of you to see the conclusion. So when he comes back, we could say that we've, oh, maybe he's going to come back in. Let's see what happens. So if I just, don't know if we just give him just one more minute to see if he comes back. And then again, I'm just going to. Liam, could I just ask if you're able, see if Liam is there. Liam is there.
I'm here, Lena. I sent him a quick email and see if he can pick that up.
Yep. Okay, great. But maybe if I just read out, should I just read out the conclusions? So that elders play a key role as the medium of exchanging of the historical information from one generation to the next generation, so young generations. And when this method is disrupted, the young generation remain victims of the environment. And in school, digital lab would help the young generation by giving them a chance to learn about their local history. And already Dr. Nancy Virchohora is looking at this with the Tanzania Institute of Education. And this will be a legacy of this project, not only to Mgao, but Tanzania history and pedagogy. So I'm going to just start sharing and hope that, stop sharing and hope that he'll be able to reconnect with us. Because really it would be, we'd like him to hear what you're going to say, Laura. So don't know if Nancy's still connected. No, I don't see her. Because otherwise she could try and bring him back as well. Let me just text Nancy for a second. And Laura, I don't know if you want to gather your response for a second. I know you have to.
I was going to comment on the fact that it's always so unfair that we organize these practice sessions and the technology works fine. And then in the actual event, inevitably, that's where we have our technical difficulties. But I'm happy to hold on for a few minutes with my comments. But I have lots of things. What a fascinating presentation in terms of the intergenerational knowledge and the way that's being preserved and the use of translations. There's so much we can think about. So I'll save that as a sort of food for thought, and hopefully we can get Swedi back.
I'm just going to say that if he can't join Zoom, he can ring my WhatsApp. And then we can at least have his voice. I think they've lost power actually, because Nancy's phone is also not responding. Oh, don't know if anybody else is here from Tanzania. Baraka's also. So who are you from to be there from Tanzania? And Baraka is there as well. Hi. So you guys haven't lost electricity. Do any of you have Swedi's WhatsApp by any chance?
Yes, I have his number.
Brilliant. So do you mind just texting him and just saying if he maybe even rings you or if he rings my number, which is on WhatsApp, I'll put it in the chat. Have you got access to chat, Zahura? go over to you. Thanks, Liam. So Laura, and then we'll go to Zahura and Hawaida's a question. That's great. Thank you.
And thanks for, I'm so sorry Swedi's not here. I wanted to, first of all, say congratulations on fascinating research and so important. It was really exciting to be able to learn a little bit about the project that Swedi's been involved in Tanzania. And of course, so many other people have been involved as well. So I'll keep my comments brief. And I see that there are already some really interesting questions in the chat as well. So I, in many ways, don't feel like my comments are very necessary at this point, but I am going to be selfish because I found myself thinking about a couple of things. And one was this very idea of colonial memory. I think one of the things that Swedi did so well was tease out both what is remembered and what is lost, and that juxtaposition between the Maji rebellion and what was going on in the Magao village in terms of what people knew about the village and what they knew about the German presence in Tanzania. That difference was incredibly striking and I think so important. Because that erasure of knowledge, in some ways, that's one of the things that happens with colonial memories, right? That part of what the work that colonialism does is prevent us from remembering or knowing indigenous ways of being, of valuing and remembering. I think Swedi used the term vernacular languages, but the loss is as equally important, if not more so, than what is remembered. And that juxtaposition of the two examples was really fascinating. And so I found myself wondering, you know, given the nature of the project and the research that was being undertaken, what is colonial memory? And I was curious to know if the children or the elders had given thought or voice to what the idea of colonial memory meant to them, or whether it was sort of implicit in this kind of intergenerational dialogue that the project was pursuing. I also found myself wondering, given the results, as sort of what Swedi was able to share with us, and I know he had more to say there, but this would be really important, I think, for the history of colonialism, imperialism in Germany and Britain as well. I think too often that the work that goes into showing these long-term impacts, particularly the negative impacts, take place at the local level, the regional level, and don't get often translated back to the very imperial powers that were responsible for this. And so this is something that I think, if we think about archives and audience, I would, just as maybe something for the IF community to think about as well, you know, we can talk about the impacts of imperialism and colonialism, but increasingly, I think we need to make sure that there's sort of a speaking back that happens beyond the local. And so I'd be curious to hear some, you know, whether there is work happening in this vein, and if not, what possibilities exist for that. I do also, I think my last comment, as I say, I'm going to keep my comments very brief, but I really was fascinated, and Swedi just had a chance to sort of hint at this. And so maybe Nancy or somebody else could speak to this, but this dialogue, the sort of intergenerational dialogue that's taking place between the 1960s and 1970s research and what's happening in the 2020s, so important, so fascinating to think about. Working with existing archival materials and oral history materials and bringing them into dialogue with the present, both in terms of educational materials, but also as question marks, right? How do we read this material differently almost half of a century later? And so I would have loved to hear more about that particular dynamic. I think that we can probably see it as researchers. We would bring a certain set of questions to how those two sets of oral histories are in dialogue or can be in dialogue with one another. But I also wonder about the children's reactions to hearing. I don't know the extent to which they've been exposed to the material from the 1960s and 70s, but what a fascinating and important opportunity for learning. And then of course, creating a new dialogue out of this intergenerational dialogue. But Lena, you were talking after Rebecca and George, your fabulous presentation. So congratulations to you as well. I've enjoyed this dialogue so much. But one of the things you were talking about, Lena, was this idea of gatekeepers. And I know we sort of talked about it a little bit with the first session, but here's a really interesting place where the researchers are not necessarily playing gatekeeper, but they're certainly playing the role of connector or bridge builder in a way that the children wouldn't have access to these materials from the 60s and 70s otherwise. And so I guess facilitator is the word that I'm thinking about. And perhaps this is something else we could explore, not only the really significant role that gatekeepers have played in this work, and we often think of archives as having a very gatekeeping function, but what if we take the flip side and start thinking about how we can facilitate, which is so much of what IF has been doing, and I think really comes through in this project in particular. So I think I'll end there, but just again, big congratulations and big thanks for a really interesting presentation that I think draws attention to many important themes and issues we can be exploring.
Thanks, Laura, so much for that. Before we dive into Zahura's question, I just wanted to respond to what you mentioned, so important before that. I mean, all of it is really interesting, but I think I felt that the second last point was directed specifically at work for IF. And just to reassure you, and God willing, visa coming, Nancy will be here in the next few days. And one of the reasons Nancy's coming is precisely because we're looking at Africanizing and indigenizing what is happening here in the museums, and we are meeting with people with workshops in museum collections, and it's precisely to address that. I think somebody asked me, and Nancy, I know we talked about this already, but about who has heard of the Maji War in Germany. And the point is, people have to have heard of the Maji War in Germany, and that is as important as the kind of process, as you say, goes on site. And I think it would be really exciting for the manifesto of egalitarian archiving is precisely to do that together and what that means. But enough for me, but maybe Zahura, I know you had a question. I want to definitely leave time for that. Thank you so much, Laura. And I know, Laura, you might have to disappear in the next few minutes. So I really appreciate you coming to this now. Thank you. Zahura.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I look forward to hearing everyone.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. My question is, on his presentation, he said that one among of his findings is that it seemed that most of the elders, Mgao elders, were busy, so they failed to provide some information, historical information about Mgao to their kids. Again, on the conclusion, he also said that these elders from Mgao play a very big role in exchanging historical information. So I failed to understand this connection because his findings say that Mgao elders are busy, and on his conclusion, he also said that the same elders play a very big role in exchanging some historical information, whether to societies or to these kids or other people. So I need more clarification on this. How his findings say that these elders are busy. Again, they also play a very big role in exchanging this historical information. Maybe he can clarify more.
Nancy, could you respond to that?
Yes, I can definitely respond to that. What I understand from the elders being busy first is that mainly this village comprised of people who are fishermen. And these fishermen spend a lot of time doing fishing at night. And now it is the evening towards the night time that stories are narrated at home normally. So you find that the elders in this side, the one that are busy, are actually mostly men. But women fill in and tell those stories. And that's why you see that he concludes by saying that they still play a big role, because whatever that the children know, it is mainly from homes. Some of it comes from schools because a part of the Tanzania history is taught at school. But the deep history of, for example, Mgao, the culture, traditions, these are things that are instilled at home rather than at school. So while the village is affected mostly by the environment, that men spend most of the time at night doing fishing, women, on the other hand, do still give that particular information. I don't know if I have answered Zura's question, but I also want to go back to what Laura has spoken a little bit. I'll pick up on the colonial memory, and I'll also pick up a little bit about the children being exposed to the 1960s, 1970s data that were already available at the University of Dar es Salaam. The colonial memory in Mgao is actually a very complex thing because it has different layers, and the community understand some of this particular history, colonial history. So, for instance, Archives has it that the Mgao was first invaded by the French, and then later the Arabs, and then later the Germans, and at the end the British. The only memories that are recorded are those coming from the Arabs. So the community only speak about the Arabs and also slave trade. Other aspects, such as the German colonialism, British colonialism, where it was one, actually, Mgao was one of the First World War battle. But the only thing that they'll talk about is about ships leaving the Swedi Bay or leaving Mgao, going away. But there's no more details about how the memories of the Germans or the British affected them. So the entanglement with the Arabs seems to have been deeper than the rest. And about the children and the dialogue between the 1960s and the 1970s, unfortunately, these two has not been put together. So the children memories were collected in 2020, and in 2021, the memories that are available in recordings were transcribed, digitized, as he said, but these have not been taken back to the community. So the second part was the researcher alone integrating with the information he got from the field and the one that is obtaining from the video clips. So the two have not been taken to the community, to the students and the community to dialogue about what is available, which was collected before, and what now the community knows. So that's what is happening.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for filling that in. And I see that Swedi has now come back. Swedi, are you there?
Yes, Helena.
Oh.
Sorry for that.
No, sorry, we have lost you, but you can listen to in a recording to what Laura said. When we have the recording, we'll share it with you. But now I'd like to, but you can answer directly. Hawaiida's question, and Kopso also has a question. So Hawaida, did you want to ask your question directly, or would you like me to read it?
Okay.
No, it's fine. It's written there. Whatever you prefer.
You go ahead and ask it. It's always nice to hear.
Okay, well, Swedi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was just intrigued by the comparative data between the older data and the new one. And if you found that the narratives metamorphosized or changed, and if this is because the new generation is crafting a whole different imagined future. This was my question. I hope it's clear.
Swedi, are you able to answer that?
Sorry, I don't hear you well. If you don't care, you can repeat.
Should I change? So the question is basically whether you found that there has been a change in the narrative, partly because, if I understood correctly, of the way a new future is imagined. So how are these different narratives? First of all, are they different about what's understood? And how is that about how the future is imagined differently?
Elena, I'm trying to answer you, but I got some challenges in network here. But as we know, elders play a key role. Elders play a key role in as the medium of exchange of the historical information from one generation to another. And when this method disturbed, the young generation remains a victim of the environment. Do you get me?
Yeah.
So we are opening the door that stakeholders, you as the stakeholders, and to collaborate with us to the construction of the digital labs at Mgao Primary School and the Kisiwa Secondary School. In this school digital lab, without would help the generation by giving them a chance to learn more about local history. And already Dr. Nancy Rushohora is looking at with the Tanzanian Institute of Education. This will be legacy for this project, I know, and not only to Mgao, but also to the Tanzanians pedagogy.
Thank you, Swedi. I think what we'll do is also send you the questions from the chat so you can also see whether there's other bits of them you could answer, but we're almost out of time, so I'm quite keen that Kodjo asks his question.
Well, I just wanted to ask that what kind of history is passed on by the elders and whose history? Because that's history. We say local history, but that could be from the perspective of the, in quotes, the so-called elders. What do we mean by the elders? Because I see the elders may think about what interests them or what impresses them about the past, the Battle of Swedi Bay, for example. But there are other things about life that could be documented as history. So that's my point. Do we have to rely on the elders because they're supposed to be custodians of knowledge? Or there are other ways by which we can study history? My point is, let's interrogate whatever we document as being passed on to the children. Within what context were the stories or were the narratives created? In whose interest were the stories created? And what is the purpose of that history? Thank you.
Swedi, I think maybe Swedi's disappeared again, unfortunately. Oh no, there you are, Swedi. Did you want to answer that? Swedi?
Is Swedi there?
I don't know. I think he's frozen. Nancy, did you want to start? And if Swedi comes back, we can just get him in for this last response.
Yes, I can fill in a little bit that the history that was collected from Gao, from what I know is that the main purpose was to check whether the younger generation are actually aware, because there is a monument that is at their disposal. So the first thing was to check whether there is anything that the younger generation know about the monuments and the history of Mgao. And so majority actually indicated that they were aware of the monument and the history of slavery in the village. So the elders now are coming in, I think, for the general history now of the site, not necessarily those related to colonial. And also this does not mean that such as cultural tradition were actually left out. The Makonde where Mgao is located, the community there are the Makonde. So the Makonde are actually very traditional, and they are the keepers of their tradition. So they have a dance, they have carvings that are actually sold worldwide. So their culture is actually deep. And so the keepers of that culture and the transfer of that particular culture is still there. They are even fighting with the government about going to school. It is one of the region that the government is actually targeting and putting more effort into forcing them to go to school so that they can, otherwise they'll practice their tradition. So you find even the children also go to fishing because that's the job that their fathers are doing instead of going to school. So I think there is a lot that Swedi can bring up if he comes back. That's what I can say for now.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, Swedi, if you have a final word towards that before we think, oh, no, Swedi's gone. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being really patient. And thank you for these fantastic dialogues. Could I just one more time to say thank you so much to all our speakers and presenters. And we look forward to continuing these. Already, every time we do one of these, it helps greatly to identify some really fantastic, key and important issues we have to work with together. So we look forward to seeing you at next week's one, which is on a Monday rather than a Tuesday. So just keep that in mind. But thank you all so much. And to Rebecca and to George especially, and to Mark and Swedi and Laura as well. And for all of you who come along to join the dialogue. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Lena.